We recently returned to Tasmania just a couple of weeks ago from Antarctica. Operation Musashi was our fifth campaign down to Antarctica, and our strategy here is to chase and pursue the Japanese whaling fleet continuously in order to cut their quotas in half and cost them money. And so for the last 3 years they haven't made any profit, and we've been able to cut that quota in half. This year we pursued the fleet for over 2,500 miles along the Antarctic coast, intervening at every opportunity. And this year the Japanese became much more aggressive for the first time. Never before had they killed any whales while we were pursuing them. They decided to try and do that this year, and they did it for a day. And what happened was that we didn't fall back, and when they tried to load the whales onto the slipway, it resulted in 3 major collisions with their ships. This is extremely dangerous, what we're doing down there, and of course we're condemned for this. The International Whaling Commission, the only thing that they can agree on is to condemn us every year. But somebody's got to uphold the law. And if the governments of the world were doing their job, we wouldn't have to be doing this. By the way, many of these whales are killed within 200 miles of Scott Island, which is a British possession, which means that there's a 200-mile limit there, and Britain by all rights should be down there protecting those waters, just as New Zealand and Australia should be protecting their waters. The Australian federal court has banned all whaling in the Australian Antarctic Territory, but Japan just refuses to acknowledge that court order and continues to kill whales, and Australia doesn't back it up with any enforcement. One of the government officials in Australia said, well, the problem is Japan doesn't recognize our sovereignty over those waters, so they do nothing. If Australia had that kind of attitude during World War II, everybody would be speaking Japanese in Australia today. You know, they certainly didn't recognize the sovereignty of Australia back then. What Japan is doing in these waters is blatantly illegal. They are targeting endangered whales in an established whale sanctuary in violation of a global moratorium on commercial whaling, in violation of the Convention on the International Treaty on Endangered Species, in violation of the Antarctic Treaty, in violation of the regulations of the International Whaling Commission. It doesn't get more illegal than that. These people are no different than poachers in Africa, except for the color of their skin and the fact that they have a lot of money. But the slaughter of elephants illegally on the plains of Serengeti is just as it's just like that. They're both criminals. They're poaching operations, and the governments do have the power to stop it. But unfortunately, there's a lack of political and economic will or motivation to intervene. So that leaves it up to non-government organizations like ourselves. And we operate in accordance with the United Nations World Charter for Nature, which allows for individuals and non-government organizations to intervene. And proof of that is the fact that we've been doing this since 1977. And in that entire time, we have sunk over 10 whaling vessels, shut down numerous whaling operations, confiscated hundreds of thousands of miles of long lines and drift nets, rammed vessels on the high seas, and we've never been convicted of a felony crime. The reason for that, despite all of the name-calling and accusations from the PR firms of the companies we oppose, is that we are intervening against criminal operations. It's as simple as that. And criminals, the last place they want to go is court. In 1986, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet in Reykjavik harbor and destroyed their whale processing plant. And of course, everybody at the time condemned us and said that that was a criminal act. And I wrote repeatedly to the Icelandic government asking if they had any official charges against us, and couldn't get an answer. So finally, I had to get on a plane and fly to Reykjavik and demand that they arrest me. They met me at the airport with about 200 police officers, and the chief immigration officer came up and said, Captain Watson, how long do you intend to stay in Iceland? I said, well, I don't really know. 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years, you tell me. Well, we have to go for interrogation. I said, oh, sounds like fun, let's go. So we went off to interrogation. He said, are you admitting to sinking these ships? I said, well, you know, we sunk them. We're going to sink the other 2 at the first opportunity. The next day they put me on a plane, sent me back to New York City, saying, the Minister of Justice stood up and he says, who the hell does he think he is? He comes into our country and demands to be arrested. Get him out of here. They knew that to put me on trial would be to put Iceland on trial because they're in violation of the global moratorium on commercial whaling. So when people say that we're doing something criminal, we say, well, then put us in court, arrest us, we'll take it on. You know, somebody's got to deal with this, and if your governments aren't going to do it, we're going to do it. But the bottom line here is that we don't do what we do for people. In fact, we don't care what governments or people or organizations or anything say about what we do, because our clients are quite simply whales, or sharks, or sea turtles, or fish. That's who we represent. After sinking those ships in Iceland, I had a former colleague from Greenpeace approach me, and he said, "I just want to let you know that what you did in Iceland was reprehensible, unforgivable, and unacceptable." And I said, "So?" He said, "I think you should know what people in this movement think about what you're doing." I said, "John, I don't really care. We're not sinking those whaling ships for you or Greenpeace or any other human being on the planet. But if you can find me one whale that disagrees with what we did, I promise you we won't do it again." Because that's who we represent. And the reason that I'm so committed to this really goes back to 1975 when I was with Greenpeace. We come up with this idea back then of protecting whales by getting between the harpoons and the whales. And I developed this plan to put these small inflatable boats between the harpoons and put our bodies on the line. We were reading a lot of Gandhi at the time, and we thought that all we had to do was put ourselves in a position where the whalers would be forced to risk killing a human being to kill a whale, and we thought that that would work. And it did for about 25 minutes, and I was in front of a Soviet harpoon vessel in the Pacific bearing down on us at full speed in quite rough waters, and in front of us were 8 magnificent sperm whales that were fleeing for their life. And every time they tried to get a shot, I would turn the boat and block the harpoon. We were feeling pretty good about that until the Soviet captain came down the catwalk towards the bow and screamed into the ear of the harpooner and looked at us and smiled and brought his finger across his throat, and that's when I realized Gandhi wasn't going to pull through for us that day. And a few moments later, there's this incredible explosion, and the harpoon flew over our head. The cable slashed down beside us in the water, just barely missing us. And it slammed into the backside of one of the whales in front of us, a female, and she screamed. It's a very human-like scream, very eerie. She rolled over on her side in a fountain of blood, and suddenly the largest whale in that pod hit the water with his tail and disappeared. And we'd been told by all of the experts he'd attack us, and we'd seen all the old Yankee woodcuts of enraged sperm whales attacking whalers and, smashing their boats, and quite, deservedly so, to protect their kind. So it was with a great deal of anxiety that Bob Hunter and I sat in this little rubber boat waiting for 50 tons of very angry animal to come up underneath of us. But instead he swam right beneath us and threw himself out of the water, hurled himself straight at the harpooner on the Soviet vessel. But they were ready for him with an unattached harpoon, and at point blank range he pulled the trigger and the harpoon slammed into his head, exploded, the whale fell back screaming and thrashing in the water, and as he rolled about on his surface, I saw his eye, I caught his eye. He looked straight at me, he dove again, and now I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming at us real fast. And this whale came up and out of the water at an angle so that the next movement was to fall right down on top of us. I looked up. I was so close I could have reached up and encircled one of those 6-inch teeth in the jaw, and it was that close. And I looked up, and I looked into an eye the size of my fist, and what I saw in that eye changed my life forever, because I saw understanding. The whale understood what I was trying to do, and I could see the movement that he made with all his muscles tensed, and he pulled back. And instead of coming forward and crushing us, he fell back into the sea. I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface, and he died. Could have killed us, and made a conscious decision to spare us. And for that reason, I'm personally indebted to his kind to do everything I can to protect them. But as we were sitting there in that boat after the whale had been killed, I thought to myself, why were the Soviets killing these whales? These incredibly intelligent, socially complex creatures, they don't eat sperm whale meat, they use the oil for lubricating high heat-resistant machinery. And one of the things that the Soviets want spermaceti oil for, or did want it, was for the manufacture of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I just thought to myself, here we are destroying these beautiful creatures, these intelligent animals, for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it struck me like a bolt of lightning that we are insane. And from that moment on, I have served whales, not people. So we're immune to criticism. In fact, we don't mind it. The more people who criticize us, the more death threats we get, the more we feel are doing our job, because our job as conservationists is to rock the boat and piss people off, to make them think. Because the oceans are dying. They're dying in our time. And we're not going to save it through all these silly little meetings and conferences that they have all the time, and all of these laws that they pass that they don't enforce, and all of the petitions and the talks and the posturing is not going to save our seas. Only through getting out there and shutting down these criminal operations are we going to protect the oceans. And if governments aren't going to do it, then we will do it.